Wolf58 here, and welcome back to my channel. And look what I have today. 5 beautiful Smith & Wesson stainless steel revolvers. And you know by now I love the Smith & Wesson stainless revolvers with beautiful wooden stocks mounted on them. And here are 5 of my favorite revolvers, the Smith & Wesson Model 686 Distinguished Combat Magnums. Now these guns was first developed and it started sale in 1980, and they were built to be the perfect compromise between the smaller K-frame 357 Magnum and the larger N-frame 357 Magnums. Primarily the smaller Model 66 and 19s and the larger Model 27s and 28s. Now, to me, the 686 is the perfect handgun because it is the great balance between size, power, and durability as far as Smith & Wesson revolvers go. And I've been able to acquire 5 of them. From the first one, which was the Model 686, most commonly called the No Dash, all the way up to and including the Dash 4. Now, a Dash 1, 2, 3, and 4 is every time Smith & Wesson makes a change or an improvement to one of their revolvers, they will indicate that by adding a dash and a number behind that dash. And then each change would be, they would increment that post-dash number by 1. Thus, Dash 1, Dash 2, Dash 3, Dash 4. Now, I know many people see that and understand that part of it, but they don't really understand what the changes were between the dash models. So today I want to do a little show and tell, and I want to talk about the specifics concerning the Model 686 and some of the features that are exclusive to the 686, and then the differences between each dash all the way up to and including the Dash 4. And then I want to talk briefly about what happened to the revolver after the Dash 4s, which included the Dash 5, 6, and 7, and all the way up to now including the modern gun now. So I want to start right here. This is the Model 686 No Dash. This is a version of the first gun that was issued by Smith & Wesson in 1980. Now, all of these guns were safety checked prior to starting this video, so we're good on that. Some of the things that were unique and exclusive to the Model 686 were the fully underlugged barrel and the Giancarlo Alf stocks. 686s were all issued with Giancarlo Alf stocks. The square butt models had the square butt checkered speed loader cutout style, and the round butt model had the speed loader cutout style finger grooved uncheckered stocks. All 686s were featured a semi-target hammer with a mounted firing pin, and you could get one of 2 triggers. You could either get the smooth combat trigger or a slightly wider serrated target trigger. All 686s were equipped with fully adjustable rear sights, and they could come either with the white outline blade as mounted on this one, or with the full black blade. And all of the front sights were the ramp style red inserted type that were integral to the barrel. The original 686s were all 6-shot revolvers with fluted cylinders. Now later versions were 7-shot revolvers that came out where Smith & Wesson started to produce in the late 1990s, and some even had unfluted cylinders. And all 686s had serrated back straps and forth straps. Now, this fully underlugged barrel was the one feature on the 686 that distinguished it from all other Smith & Wesson revolvers at that time. And I believe that is some of the reason why it garnered the name the Distinguished Combat Magnum. Now, this gun being produced in 1980, around 1986, Smith & Wesson made their first change to the 686, and thus the -1 gun was born. Now, the differences between this gun and that gun that is obvious to you is that this gun has a 6-inch barrel and that No Dash has a 4-inch barrel. Aside from that, the changes that were made were all internal, and it was called the introduction of a radius stud package. Now, what that meant was the stud on the frame that the trigger and the hammer were mounted to were enlarged slightly at the bottom where they attached to the frame in order for the hammer and trigger to ride on, that minimized the chance of breaking those studs if the revolver was dropped and landed on the hammer. Other than that, the -1 gun is identical to the No Dash gun. It has a serrated backstrap, Giancarlo Al's wooden stocks, has the same hammer and mounted firing pin, same sights, rear and front, and this model also has the same smooth trigger. So outwardly, the frame and everything else on this gun is exactly to the No Dash gun. So there's no visible way of identifying one from the other aside from looking at the model number underneath the crane. Now, in 1987, Smith & Wesson made another change that was born out of necessity, and they issued the -2 gun. Now, what that involved was on the No Dash and the -1 versions, they discovered that there was a problem from users that was causing the cylinder to lock up during rotation. And that centered around the firing pin, hammer nose, and the firing pin bushing. That under heavy recoil, the spent cartridge primers was binding and pushing the bushing back into the revolver and thus locking up the cylinder, so the cylinder wouldn't rotate. So during the production of the -1 gun, Smith & Wesson issued a voluntary recall so that if you sent those guns back to Smith & Wesson, they would install a new bushing and a new modified hammer to correct the problem. But in 1987, all of the 686s that they were producing were leaving the factory with that new bushing and hammer so that they wouldn't have to continue recalling models that they were manufacturing. And thus they called the revolvers that had the improved hammer and bushing the 686-2. Now, that is the only discernible difference between the -2 and the -1 gun. And if it's a modified -1 gun, there's no difference between the modified -1s and the -2s. In 1988, they did another change and they introduced the -3. Now, the obvious difference between this gun and the previous ones is that this gun is a round butt revolver with a 2.5-inch barrel. And because it is a round butt revolver, they have the round combat style stocks on them with the finger grooves uncheckered. Now, the one difference that they made from the -2 to the -3, again, was an internal change. and it's centered around the yoke retention system. What that change actually involved was this screw that also uh, is used to hold on the side plate was modified in order that the tip of that screw was changed to fit better in the yoke groove that retains the crane, thus making that fit much tighter and made for a much tighter frame to crane fit. In reality, that was a continuation of addressing the problems that they were having with the cylinder lockup on the no dash and the dash 1 models, because that tighter fit minimized cylinder backlash against the recoil plate that was contributing to the bushing issues in the first place. Now, aside from that modification, there's no other discernible differences between the dash 3 and the previous dash 2. Now, in 1993, Smith & Wesson made another change, and this was proved to be one of the most significant changes that they made to the 686, and issued the dash 4. Now, this was the first model that had external differences that you could discern a dash 4 from any of the previous 686 models. One of the first and most noticeable changes was the rear sight leaf. On the dash 4, the rear sight leaf is shorter, not as wide as the previous models, and it has a rounded front on it. The sight leaves from the previous models, as you can see, is much longer, slightly wider, and it has it's squared at the end, the front end. Now, in order to incorporate that change into the frame was also made slightly different in order for that sight to be slightly recessed within the frame. The second change was they changed the shape of the extractor. Now, this extractor is shaped more like a star. And as a result, the cylinder was also modified in order for that extractor to fit flush. Now, that's a notable difference from the previous models because it was more of a concentric design. Though it did fit flush in the cylinder, all of the fingers were cut exactly the same. And the third difference that's very difficult to see is they pre-drilled and tapped holes underneath the sight leaf so that you could easily mount a scope for those users that like to remove the sight and mount scopes. You would no longer have to drill and tap the frame. The holes were already there when the Revolver was manufactured. Now, those are the 3 or 4 notable differences between the dash 4 and the previous models. Now, sometime around 1995 or 1996, Smith & Wesson then started to make their first steps toward what they would consider their modern Revolver. Now, those steps were during the latter parts of the dash 4 production. They started to phase out the square-butted revolvers and go exclusively to round-butt revolvers. As a result of that, they introduced the whole rubber grips and started to move away or phase out the Smith & Wesson factory stocks. And that's for the round-butt and the square-butt versions. And they also started to phase in the new tapered cylinder release thumb piece. again, which is different from all of the previous models that was kind of the traditional wide flat piece. Now, this was the last 686 or any Smith & Wesson revolver that was going to have other features on here you would never see again on Smith & Wesson revolvers. Most notably was the hammer-mounted firing pin. All future Smith & Wesson revolvers would not have a hammer-mounted firing pin. They would have the frame-mounted firing pin. Latter models, starting with the Dash 5, would also no longer have a forged hammer and trigger. They would have the MIM hammer and trigger. And no future models would have square butt frames. Now, those were the changes that happened with not just the 686, but all of their subsequent models as well. So that's kind of the evolution of the 686 from introduction all the way up to the Dash 4 and beyond. I still think it's a beautiful revolver. And I don't want to imply that there's anything wrong with the MIM triggers and MIM hammers. I have a model 629-6 that has that and the frame-mounted firing pin. And it has proven to be a very, very reliable, high-quality built gun. But my preference are these old, earlier revolvers that have the features that I like. So if given a choice, these are the ones that I would rather have. But if I'm going to own a new Smith & Wesson modern revolver, I'll just have to buy the ones that have the frame-mounted firing pins and the MIM parts. And I don't have an issue with that because they've proven to be just as high quality and just as reliable as these revolvers of old. But anyway, thanks for watching this video. I hope that was enlightening and entertaining. If so, please click my like, share, and subscribe button. As always, I love talking about and showing these revolvers. And I appreciate any comments that you may leave. And I don't mind criticism as long as it's constructive. That's how I learn, grow, and improve. But that's all I have for now. I appreciate you. And until the next time, this is Big Swole 58, signing off.